What did we learn from day 7 of New York Giants training camp? Find out next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all of my written work. And as always, we welcome on in our Blue Crew community members, our everydayers, our newcomers, and everybody in between. And we thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And if you're making us your first listen of the day, we appreciate that as well. All right, folks, 7 practices in the books for the New York Giants. And we're going to talk about some of the bigger picture things and some of the things that I'm going to talk about, not just were relevant to this practice that just wrapped up on Thursday, but something we found out about when we spoke to Brian Daboll in the morning. So we're going to start off with some general observations. We'll talk about the thing that Brian Daboll revealed, which I thought was very telling. And then I found a very interesting statistical pattern regarding a position group on the offense, the tight ends, that I want to talk about, because I just found this to be very head scratching as to why this statistical anomaly is just, why it's there. So we're going to talk about those 3 topics on today's show. So again, welcome on into everybody. Let's jump in. All right. So the best way I can summarize the Giants practice, there was a lot of good, we saw some deep balls, obviously, some good passes and whatnot. But at the end of practice, head coach Brian Daboll had the team, despite the fact that it was, again, very suffocating out there as far as the heat and the humidity, he had the team run some gassers. They weren't long gassers in that it wasn't from one sideline to one sideline. It was more like 10-yard gassers. And the reason why I think he did that was because the practice had moments when it was sloppy. And specifically, there were about 6 or so pre-snap penalties that were called on the Giants. All right. So now we are 7 days in or 7 practices in to training camp, and the sloppiness still continued. So I got curious. I went back and I looked up the pre-snap penalties for the Giants last year and just how much of an effect they had on the team. All right. And also where they ranked in pre-snap penalties in terms of the league. Now, obviously, defensive encroachment, that's a pre-snap penalty, but I want to focus specifically on the offense because that's where I think most of the penalty problems came. So I have false start, delay of game, and illegal formation as my pre-snap penalty categories that I looked up. This via NFLpenalties.com. The Giants last year in false starts, they had 26 for 126 yards. That was the 8th most in the league. The league average, 22.09. In delay of games, the Giants had 10, which tied them for 2nd most. They lost 50 yards on delay of games. The average in the league, 5.38. All right. Now, illegal formations, the Giants were a little bit better there. So the Giants had 2 for 10 yards. That was tied for 29th in the league, so a little bit better there. And the average was actually 4.03. So that was a category that the Giants were pretty good at. So what I'm kind of getting at with these stats is that discipline penalties, they continue to bite this team. And it's something they've got to get cleaned up. I mean, there should be no reason why, if you're on the offense and you know what the snap count is, and especially, in a training camp practice, when it's not as loud as, it might be inside a stadium, especially a closed-in stadium, there's no reason to jump offside. Now, I don't know if that's because the defense is, threatening and maybe the offensive linemen want to get a heads up on it. but it was a problem kind of across the board with not just the first team, but also the second team and the third team offense. So that is something this team better get cleaned up, because too many penalties, particularly pre-snap, and suddenly, you might have second and short or third and short, and you go and you commit a pre-snap penalty, and now all of a sudden that changes everything, because now you've got long yardage to try and make up. So that was kind of something that jumped out on the negative side. Now, just real quick, some good news from the injury perspective. Malik Neighbors, Wandale Robinson did return to practice. They also did 11-on-11 stuff, team drills. All right. Didn't think that they would, but they participated in that. Jalen Hyatt, as I told you, or as you heard yesterday on yesterday's show when he spoke to me, Jalen Hyatt was back as well. So the receiver core is getting a little bit healthier now, which is good. Cam Scattaboo, I don't think he did much in terms of working today. They have him on some kind of schedule. Again, I don't know what the injury is with him. I'm trying to find out. But Scattaboo, he runs so hard, and he's such a ball of energy. And, I don't know if maybe he was spent or if he pulled something. I will try and see if I can find out for you what's going on there. And then finally, a couple of Giant players were excused. DJ Davidson, who, by the way, I thought might have suffered a serious injury when I saw him right in front of me. He went down on the ground on a play, and he was grabbing at his leg, and they took him off to the side, and they were stretching him. That turned out to be cramps. All right. So thankfully, he's not injured seriously. So DJ Davidson was excused from the practice. Greg Van Roten also excused from the practice. Greg Van Roten's not going to be in camp probably for the next couple of days, as he and his wife are expecting their second child any moment. Now, the fact that Greg Van Roten wasn't there, that meant more reps for Evan Neal at right guard. Okay, so Evan Neal continues to be a pretty good run blocker. I have no problem with his run blocking. The pass pro, still a little herky-jerky for my taste, I would say. So, that's still a work in progress. I want to see, obviously, how he does when we get to the preseason games, the first one being next week. But I just thought Evan Neal, hit and miss a little bit with pass pro. He's mainly been good, I would say, throughout camp when he's been, put at right guard or left guard. But he still has those moments where it's just not as smooth, and the motion is just, kind of clunky. And if your footwork is going to be clunky like that, you probably are not going to get set, especially when you're going up against a speed rusher. So that's something I still want to see, him continue to work on. But, the good news with Evan Neal, he is on the right path. I think he's going to be a fine guard. I don't know if he's necessarily going to beat out Van Roten at this point for the starting guard position, but we'll see. There's still a lot of the summer left. There's still the preseason games to go. The joint practices with the Jets, which is coming up in a couple of weeks, that's going to tell us a lot. So a lot more to keep an eye on as we watch training camp continue to unfold and move into the next stage, which is going to be the preseason stage, which technically starts next week when the Giants start getting ready for their preseason games. All right, coming up next, we learned something from the other day. All right, it was actually in Tuesday's practice, something we saw towards the end that head coach Brian Daboll revealed was done kind of on purpose. I'll tell you what I'm talking about right after this. Hey, Giant fans, ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So, in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. With Monarch Money, I've been able to get a complete glance at my household spending, all in one easy-to-use app. This helps with budgeting and planning, not just for the upcoming week, but also for the short and long-term savings goals that we have. So go on, take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com to get 50% off your first year. Again, that's monarchmoney.com, and that promo code for 50% off your first year, Locked On NFL, LOCKEDON NFL. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. Coming up, Giants have practiced. They're back in pads, actually, on Friday and Saturday. They're off Sunday. So I will have a show for you next on Saturday. We'll get the 2 padded practices in, and I'll just kind of, wrap those 2 up into one neat little bow. So we'll get that out to you probably either Saturday night or worst case Sunday morning. We'll have that out for you. So the Giants on Thursday, they weren't in pads. They kind of took a little break after being in pads Monday and Tuesday. They're going to be in pads now again on Friday and Saturday. So the pads will be popping, and hopefully we'll see more of a mix of running game and passing game. Because right now, for the first 2 padded practices we've seen, it's been mostly running, but maybe it's time we see a little bit more passing. Maybe that's on the docket. So anyway, all right. Speaking of the padded practices, something head coach Brian Daboll said in his pre-practice briefing on Thursday kind of caught my attention. And it's interesting because this is really something Daboll has been doing a lot of when it comes to the quarterbacks, and in particular Jackson Dart. All right. So what happened was, if you remember, I talked about how at the end of the team drills on Tuesday, it was a little sloppy. There was a delay of game penalty, and they just weren't able to punch the ball into the end zone, the offense. They had pulled out Jameis Winston after he got them down into the red zone. They put Jackson Dart in there, and Jackson Dart wasn't able to seal the deal. All right. So Daboll actually revealed that for that last sequence of plays, he decided to cut off all radio communication with both the offense and the defense. So in other words, there were no plays being radioed into the helmets as to what they needed to do on offense or defense. And he basically wanted those guys to come up with a play and counter each other. So his reasoning for that, and I really like what, this approach, because look, you got to be ready for anything and everything. But Daboll's reasoning was simple. He's like, you never know. During a game, maybe the radio communication goes out. You can't work it. So now what do? You got to have to go on the fly. And I found it kind of interesting because with Jackson Dart, he's still a rookie. He's still learning. And Daboll said that, even though the execution wasn't there, he liked the thought process. He figured that, Dart was thinking along the same lines as maybe he being Daboll and offensive coordinator Mike Kafka might think in that particular situation. And further making this whole thing kind of challenging for the offense was that it was the end of practice, and Tuesday was just a really awful day as far as the weather goes. I mean, it was hot, it was humid. It just took a lot of energy out of a person. I mean, I could just imagine how the players felt. I know I was sapped of energy after that practice. They're wearing, 40 pounds of gear. They must have been exhausted by that point. And it was one of the longest practices that we've had of the summer so far. So Daboll just kind of wanted to see, okay, how are you going to respond in this type of adverse situation? Overall, the team came through. Again, the execution might not have been there for whatever the reason, but the thought process was there, and he was generally pleased with that. And, it's interesting because a couple people, for my mailbag that I do on New York Giants on SI, they're like, how could you be ready to anoint Jackson Dart quarterback 2? First off, I'm not ready to anoint him as quarterback 2. He has been competing for quarterback 2. I don't know if he's going to win it just yet. I think it's too premature to say that for sure. But, you look at what he has done so far, and I would say that it's probably fair that to, determine that he has done a lot more right than he has wrong. It hasn't been perfect. You're going to have ups and downs. And as I have said many times on this program, progress is never linear when you're talking about people. You're going to have your highs. You're going to have your lows. Jackson Dart has had a lot of highs, and they've been good. He's made, good reads. He's handled, adverse situations well. Now, there have been times especially in the beginning when the ball was coming out of his hand a little slowly, when he wasn't making the quick reads that you would like to see. Sometimes that still happens, especially in the face of pressure, but there's been a gradual improvement compared to where he was maybe a week or so ago. So he's heading in the right direction. He's trending in the right direction. That kid's going to probably get a lot of snaps in the preseason. Now, speaking of the preseason, that's another question a lot of people have asked me. What's going to be the plan for the preseason? I got to think that the starters, especially, given the fact that, new quarterback here with Russell Wilson, I got to think that the starters are going to get enough work or more work than what they might have gotten in the past. They cannot afford, as you guys know, to come out of the gate slowly in weeks 1 and weeks 2. I think they're going to get some work. Now, you won't necessarily see everybody play. For example, I doubt you'll see Malik Neighbors, but you will probably see maybe, the starting offensive line, which needs the work. Russell Wilson with, some of the other receivers, they can use, some work in the real-time scenario. But even if it's just for a quarter or so, get them some snaps. And I do think that's going to be the case, especially in week 1 of the preseason when they go up to play Buffalo. Week 2 versus the Jets, I suspect Daboll's going to pull them back because he's going to use the joint practices as, like a substitute. And then week 3, we probably will see them again. So I do think, have a gut feeling that that's going to change. But we will see a lot of Jackson Dart, though, this preseason. I'm looking forward to seeing him in live game action because the speed of the game is going to be so much faster at this level than it was at the college level. And I think he's going to be okay. But of course, we will bring you all the updates. We'll have analysis and breakdown of all that stuff. So that will be coming up. All right, coming up next, I have a stat that I found that probably has the New York Giants tight end seeing red. I'll tell you what it is and why they are fully justified if they are seeing red over this stat right after this. Hey, Giant fans, time to fuel up and turn it up with 5-Hour Energy Transfusion. It brings the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink, minus the alcohol, into a quick, energizing shot. Whether you're sinking birdies or just making memories with friends, this is a hole-in-one for your energy game. Let's be honest. You know that some days, no matter what you're doing, you just need that extra boost to stay sharp and energized. The grape ginger lime flavor gives you the best parts of your clubhouse go-to without having to chase down the beverage cart. And right now through September 30th, when you use our promo code LOCKEDONGOLF at 5hourenergy.com, you will receive 20% off on one order. Again, this offer is only valid until September 30th on one order, and it cannot be used with other promotions or on subscriptions. That website, again, is 5-Hour Energy. That's the number 5hourenergy.com. And that promo code, again, is Locked On Golf, LOCKEDONGOLF. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And in this segment, I came across an interesting stat. I like to look at stats to kind of get an idea of how things are developing, what philosophy changes are in the offense and on the defense, and where they can improve. And a stat that I came across, which I imagine is probably having the Giants tight end seeing red, is the usage of the tight end position inside the red zone. Now, this is kind of weird because I would have thought that the Giants used the tight end a little bit more inside the red zone, but the numbers, however, did not show that. So let me give you some numbers and we'll discuss, what they mean and potentially where this might be going. All right. So in 2024, the New York Giant tight ends, the big guys, were targeted inside the red zone 4 times, going 2 of 4 for 50% catch rate with 1 touchdown. All right. So they were only targeted 4 times inside the red zone. The receivers were 15 of 35 for a 42.8% catch rate, 6 touchdowns inside the red zone. And Malik Neighbors, who you would think would be the number one target inside the red zone, 5 of 13 for 38.5% catch rate, 3 touchdowns inside the red zone. Now, couple of like macro stats for you as this relates, okay? The Giants since 2023 have scored 54 touchdowns, all right, which is the fewest in the league. Inside the red zone since 2023, they've only scored 38 touchdowns. Again, fewest in the league. Now, here's what I maybe don't understand, okay? You would think when you're inside the red zone, you would want more mismatches, ideally size mismatches, because look, the defenders, they have a less ground to cover, all right? So you would want guys maybe who are a little taller, a little bit more physical, a little bit more of a big body down there. And what's interesting is the Giants tight ends on contested catches last season, they caught 10 of 12 contested catches for an 83.3% catch rate. So if you're putting the ball up, on a fade or an alley-oop or whatever, your tight ends are probably going to come down with it. But yet the Giants, for whatever the reason, did not go to the tight ends as much in the red zone. And that was kind of surprising because you see other teams do that. And, I get it. Malik Neighbors is the talent. You want to put the ball in his hands as much as you can. But if he's going to be double teamed down there and there's going to be one-on-one opportunities for some of the other guys to make plays, why not get the tight ends more involved, right? Now, I thought to myself, okay, maybe it's because the Giants needed the tight ends to stay in to block. And that was certainly, a possibility. I took a look at the sacks that the Giants quarterbacks absorbed when inside the red zone last year. The total number of sacks that they took, 6. And that was amongst all 4 quarterbacks, Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, Tommy DeVito, and Tim Boyle. Jones took 4 of those 6 inside the red zone. Now, perhaps you could say, okay, well, that's a low number, so maybe the tight ends were kept in to block. And that's certainly a possibility. Towards the end, it was interesting. They started using an extra offensive lineman as a tight end, especially down there to make sure that everything was shored up and protected. But, if you're going to use an extra offensive lineman, why not, get one of the other tight ends? If you're going 12 personnel, why not get one of those guys in? But it just seemed like the Giants went more with 11 personnel inside the red zone and didn't have the success. It was kind of funny. They had no trouble getting to the red zone. But once they got in there, it was like a dead zone, and they had to settle for field goals. So moving forward, I don't know if, the plan is to get the tight ends more involved down there. I can't see why you wouldn't, other than maybe, okay, is the offensive line going to be a problem? And again, that could very well be the reason why the tight ends weren't involved. But again, you look at the year-over-year stats, and I get it. The offensive line hasn't been good year over year. But at some point, if you're putting 12 personnel, and the Giants didn't use 12 personnel a whole lot down in the red zone, maybe that's a tweak they might consider making moving forward. I don't know. I mean, can't hurt at this point, right? Because if you're going to get in the red zone, you want to at least come away with 6 as opposed to having to settle for 3. So that's something to keep an eye on if the Giants, do decide to be a little bit more aggressive inside the red zone. Because look, the tight ends, those guys are big bodies. And if they have to go up against a smaller defensive back, they should be able to theoretically come down with the ball and win that battle. So I don't know, guys. I mean, it was just an interesting stat to come up with. And, we'll see how Brian Daboll, Mike Kafka plays it moving forward. But hopefully they have better luck this year inside the red zone because, like I said, the red zone has been an absolute dead zone for them. All right, Giant fans, that is going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Again, thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Please, for your next listen, why not consider checking out Locked On Bets? Betting experts Lee Sterling and Kevin Rodgers have daily MLB locks and can't miss football futures. Find Locked On Bets on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Giant fans, I will be back over the weekend with another show wrapping up the Friday and Saturday practices. Both of them will be padded, and we'll just kind of, catch up on where everything's at. I'll have any updates for you if anything important breaks, like injury news or anything like that. I will have shorts for you and whatnot. So hope you will check all that out. As always, thank you so much for listening, for tuning in. Appreciate you, and I will see you over the weekend.